there is also a high correlation with poor feeding and poor schooling and poor care. So many of the unwanted children grow up in much worse conditions than wanted children. So contraception is extremely important. And I would like to submit that this is first of all a question of advocating contraception at the highest levels in international organizations, and only secondly a question of money. It is a subject that is not discussed easily among diplomats and ministers and cabinet members and heads of state. And it should become, because it is so crucial to the future of mankind, crucial to the 3 billion people who will be born in a very complicated dangerous world in the next decades. So the first role, I think, of a country like the Netherlands is to put this issue, the subjects that you touched on in your speech, on the agenda of international organizations and help overcome the threshold which is still there, not only among conservatives, not only among people of Roman Catholic, more conservative convictions. We find it everywhere. So this is not a question of money, but of thought, of speaking out and drawing attention to this important subject. It is also extremely important from an entirely different angle. You focused on the high correlation between a young population and civil unrest. That correlation is also very clear in the case of war and civil war. Countries with a high percentage of young people have a much higher chance to fall into political violence for a number of reasons. One of them, of course, the large number of unemployed and often poorly educated young men in a world which is poisoned with small arms, which also changes power relationships in tribal and traditional society, in families, in local communities, and has many other upsetting effects and socially destructive effects outside the area of civil war. There is a general consensus that it's also very important to focus improvement of education, particularly on girls. 70% of the world's poverty problem is the problem of women and girls. Men usually are able to get a higher share of calorie and protein consumption. Poverty is feminized for about 70%. And that, of course, means that in our development cooperation, we should focus many projects on and programs on increasing education and the autonomy of women, support for women's groups, and for the role of women in local development councils. That's also the best way to circumvent corrupt governments and waste of money in official development cooperation. An entirely different conclusion, which appears from your analysis, is that it would be very wise for the European Union to invite Turkey into the Union within a reasonable period. Turkey is likely to become the largest member then of the European Union. It is, I think, growing to about 95 million people, while large European states like Germany and Italy will decline, particularly Italy, quite rapidly. This is, of course, politically a very contentious issue, but few people look at it from the point of view of the demographic balance in Europe in the long run. I admit that it's politically very sensitive, and that as the European Union takes decisions on membership by unanimity, the risk of a country stopping the process of accession is high. If a country with a not so favorable attitude towards Turkey and Islam calls for a referendum, the whole process of 15 years of negotiation might halt. So that means that it would be wise to find a solution in time by improving the ties between Turkey and the European Union step by step, and avoiding the disaster of an anti-Turkish referendum in one country or another. Another interesting point which you raised was the large cohort of people above 65 years. And you emphasized, and I think that's a very sound idea, the need to have flexible retirement policies, and also as a means of, let's say, equity, focused at not so much on a particular age, retirement, but on the number of years that people worked, because that also shifts attention to the number of years that people contributed a positive annual balance to tax income and social security premium payment and so on and so forth. While those who start working when they are 26 or 27 have for a much longer period benefited from collective expenses like education. Also, their work is lighter in general. There is a positive correlation between intellectual and office work on the one hand and life expectancy on the other. That's a fine message for us as we are sitting here. We have a good chance of getting older than those who are bricklayers, and we all need to live in brick or otherwise built houses. So it would be very equitable to introduce retirement after, for instance, 45 years of paid work, so that those who start earlier and have heavier, physically heavier work can retire early. It also means that in rich countries we have to focus more on ways to adjust for the post-retirement population to a longer independent life and less luxurious than we have gotten used to. In the Netherlands we are used to quite a luxurious way of retiring, particularly in the period that we lowered the retirement age and thought we could reduce unemployment by asking people to stop working when they were 55. Now the government is asking people to continue to work till 67 or perhaps in the future longer, and this is still very contentious in the Netherlands. You're entirely right that health allows many people to work longer years. In relation to this, we should also adjust, I think, the income expectations of post-retirement age, and think about broadening the financing of retirement schemes, collective pensions in the Netherlands called the AOW, changing the fiscal basis and also including those post-65 as contributing to the amounts needed to pay all this. Otherwise, we get an increasingly uneven distribution of premiums and taxes focused on those with paid jobs. and an increasing, I think, antagonism between the so-called economically active and the